The great hall of the Galactic Council hummed with worried voices as beings from across the known galaxy gathered for an emergency meeting that nobody wanted to attend. Admiral Tejo stood at the center of the circular chamber, watching the delegates take their seats with faces full of concern and fear. His own face showed the same worry that had been growing in his chest for the past 3 cycles, since the first reports started coming in about the new species that called themselves humans. The Viridian Admiral had seen many things in his long career commanding fleets across the Outer Rim territories, but nothing had prepared him for the intelligence briefings that now sat in neat stacks on his desk back on the flagship. Reports of rapid expansion, strange ship designs, and most troubling of all, a species that seemed to build everything as if they expected war to break out at any moment. Counselor Ye Jin settled into her crystalline seat with the grace that all of her species possessed, her translucent form catching the light from the chamber's bioluminescent walls. She had been one of the voices calling for patience when the first human ships appeared in the outer systems, but even she could not ignore what the scouts were reporting now. 17 colonies in less than 2 rotations was unprecedented even by the standards of the most aggressive expansionist species in recorded history. The emergency session had been called after Captain Hyunwoo sent his report from the border regions where he had been patrolling for the past year. The grizzled veteran had commanded ships in more conflicts than most beings could count, and his word carried weight in military circles throughout the galaxy. When Hyunwoo said something was different about a species, people listened. Tejo activated the central holographic display, and the chamber fell silent as 3-dimensional images of human ships appeared floating in the air above them. The vessels looked crude compared to the elegant designs favored by most galactic civilizations, but there was something about their construction that made experienced military officers uncomfortable. Every surface seemed to serve a purpose, every angle calculated for maximum efficiency rather than aesthetic appeal. The human ships were covered in what appeared to be weapon mounts and armor plating, far more than any reasonable exploration vessel would require. Their hulls were thick and blocky, designed to absorb punishment rather than avoid it. Most disturbing of all were the manufacturing bays that several ships carried, allowing them to produce ammunition and spare parts while in deep space, far from any support infrastructure. Ye Jin raised one delicate hand to speak, and the chamber's attention focused on her. Her voice carried the musical quality that made her species such effective diplomats, but today it trembled slightly with uncertainty. She asked why they were all so concerned about a species that had shown no hostile intentions toward any galactic civilization, and had even responded positively to the few first contact attempts that had been made. Captain Hyunwoo stood to respond, and his scarred face was grim as he looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. He had been closer to human territory than anyone else in the room, and what he had seen there kept him awake during his sleep cycles. The humans built everything like they were preparing for a war that might start tomorrow, not just their ships, but their colonies, their space stations, even their civilian facilities. He described watching human construction crews work on a mining station in the Kepler system, how they had surrounded the facility with defensive platforms and sensor arrays that could detect incoming threats from 3 star systems away. When he had questioned the human supervisor about the extensive defenses, the man had simply shrugged and said it was better to be safe than sorry. The captain's report continued with details about human manufacturing capabilities that made the industrial experts in the chamber lean forward in their seats. The humans had built automated factories that could produce everything from food to starship components without any biological oversight. Their resource extraction methods were efficient to the point of being brutal, stripping entire asteroids down to their component elements in a matter of days. But it was the cultural data that truly worried the xenosociologists present. Dr. Yun Su had been studying the limited information available about human society, and what she found painted a picture of a species unlike anything the galaxy had encountered before. Humans had been fighting wars among themselves for their entire recorded history, developing increasingly sophisticated methods of destruction as their technology advanced. The debate in the chamber grew heated as delegates argued about how to respond to the human expansion. Some called for immediate military action to contain them before they became a threat, while others insisted that diplomacy was the only reasonable approach. The Drakmori representative pointed out that his own species had gone through an aggressive expansion phase millennia ago and had eventually settled into peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. Tae-ho was about to call for a formal vote on establishing contact protocols when the chamber's communication system crackled to life with an emergency transmission. The voice that came through the speakers was filled with panic and barely controlled fear, as science vessel Astral Wind reported a massive energy signature emerging from human space. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but the message was clear enough to send chills through every being in the chamber. The humans were building something enormous in their territory, something that was generating energy readings unlike anything the scout ship's sensors had ever detected. The captain of the Astral Wind was requesting immediate backup and advising all ships to stay clear of the construction site until its purpose could be determined. As the transmission ended, the chamber erupted in worried voices as delegates demanded answers that nobody could provide. Admiral Tae-ho felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized that first contact with humanity was no longer a matter of diplomatic choice, but of galactic security. Whatever the humans were building out there in the darkness between the stars, it was big enough and powerful enough to make an entire galaxy nervous. The emergency session continued long into the night cycle as plans were made and contingencies discussed, but everyone in the chamber knew that. They were operating blind. The humans remained an unknown quantity with capabilities that seemed to grow more impressive and more frightening with each new report. The galaxy was about to learn that some species were simply different from all the others, and that humanity might be the most different of all. Commander Soo-jin stood on the bridge of the GSF Harmony's edge, watching the stars shift on the main view screen as her ship dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates provided by the panicked crew of the Astral Wind. The Harmony's edge was the most advanced diplomatic vessel in the Galactic Council fleet, equipped with the finest translation systems and cultural analysis computers that money could buy. But Soo-jin wondered if all that technology would be enough for what lay ahead. Her mission briefing had been simple in concept, but terrifying in its implications. Make formal first contact with the human leadership, assess their technological capabilities, and determine whether they posed a threat to galactic peace. The fact that the Council had sent their best diplomatic ship armed with enough firepower to level a small moon suggested they already suspected what the answer might be. Navigation Officer Boram called out sensor readings from her station as the ship approached the designated coordinates, her voice tight with the kind of professional control that barely masked growing concern. Multiple human vessels were detected in the area, along with what appeared to be a massive construction project that was generating energy signatures off the scale of their instruments. Chief Engineer Min Ho worked frantically at his console, trying to make sense of the readings his sensors were providing, but the numbers seemed impossible. The energy output from whatever the humans were building was comparable to a small star, and the gravitational distortions suggested a mass that should have collapsed into a black hole under its own weight. When the main view screen finally resolved, the image of what the humans had built, every being on the bridge fell silent in a way that Soo-jin had never experienced in her long career. Hanging in space before them was a construction that defied every principle of starship design that galactic civilization had developed over thousands of years. The partially completed hull stretched for over 50 kilometers and was covered in weapon emplacements that were larger than most of the warships in the Council fleet. The thing was not just enormous, but built with a design philosophy that spoke of a species that understood warfare on a scale that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Every line and angle of the construction seemed calculated for maximum destructive potential, from the massive railgun batteries that ran along its spine to the missile pods that clustered around its hull like mechanical barnacles. Sujin had seen the largest ships that every major galactic power could field, and none of them compared to what the humans were building. The partially completed vessel was already larger than 3 Council dreadnoughts placed end to end, and the construction scaffolding around it suggested that it was less than half finished. Bo-Ram reported that there were dozens of human ships working on the construction, most of them industrial vessels that seemed to be fabricating components in real time and welding them directly onto the hull. The efficiency of the operation was staggering, as entire sections of armor plating and weapon systems were completed and installed in a matter of hours. The communications officer announced that they were receiving a transmission from one of the human ships, and Sujin straightened her uniform before ordering it put on the main screen. The face that appeared was surprisingly ordinary, belonging to a middle-aged human male with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed completely at odds with the monstrous weapon taking shape behind him. Captain Jae-hyun of the human construction fleet greeted them with surprising warmth and enthusiasm, welcoming them to what he called the Titan Yards, as if they were invited guests rather than potential enemies conducting a reconnaissance mission. His casual manner and friendly smile made the situation even more unsettling as he spoke about the construction project with the same tone someone might use to discuss a garden renovation. When Sujin carefully inquired about the nature of the vessel under construction, Jae-hyun explained with obvious pride that it was designated Colossus-Class and represented the latest advancement in human starship technology. He seemed genuinely pleased to have visitors and offered to provide a detailed tour of the facilities if they were interested in seeing how modern human engineering worked. The conversation took a turn that made Sujin's blood run cold when she asked if this was the only ship of its type that humanity was building. Jae-hyun laughed and shook his head, explaining that they had already laid the keels for 12 more Colossus-class vessels at other shipyards throughout human space. The casual way he mentioned such an enormous military buildup suggested that he saw nothing unusual about a species constructing enough firepower to conquer half the galaxy. Sujin struggled to maintain her diplomatic composure as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. 13 ships of this size and capability would be enough to threaten every major galactic power simultaneously, yet the humans spoke about them as if they were routine additions to their fleet rather than weapons of unprecedented destructive potential. The situation became even more alarming when Jae-hyun corrected himself and mentioned that they had actually started construction on 14 Colossus-class ships, having begun work on 2 additional vessels the previous week. His explanation that you could never be too prepared struck Sujin as the kind of thinking that had led to some of the darkest periods in galactic history. As the diplomatic exchange continued, Sujin found herself learning details about human capabilities that would have been classified at the highest levels in any other civilization. Jae-hyun spoke freely about their manufacturing techniques, their resource extraction methods, and their plans for expanding their shipbuilding capacity even further in the coming years. The humans seemed to have no concept of operational security. When it came to their military capabilities, discussing their weapons systems and defensive technologies with the same openness that most species reserved for cultural exchanges. Either they were incredibly naive about the implications of sharing such information, or they were so confident in their abilities that they saw no threat in letting potential enemies know exactly what they were capable of. When the tour of the construction facility began, Sujin and her crew were amazed by the scale and sophistication of human engineering. The Colossus-class ship was not just large, but incorporated technologies that the Council's best scientists were still struggling to understand. The humans had somehow solved fundamental problems in energy distribution, structural integrity, and weapons integration that had limited starship design for millennia. As the Harmony's Edge departed the Titan Yard several hours later, Sujin knew that everything had changed. The galaxy was no longer dealing with a simple first contact situation, but with the emergence of a military power that could reshape the balance of civilization itself. The humans had not threatened anyone or made any hostile moves, but their very existence had altered the strategic calculations of every other species in known space. The report that Su-Jin would file upon her return would trigger the largest military mobilization in galactic history, but even as she began composing it in her mind, she wondered if it would be enough. The humans had built something that defied conventional understanding of what was possible, and they had done it with the casual efficiency of a species that saw such achievements as routine rather than miraculous. The emergency sessions on the Council homeworld had been running continuously for 6 standard days since Commander Su-Jin's report arrived from the Titan yards, and the massive amphitheater that normally hosted cultural celebrations was now packed with the greatest military and scientific minds the galaxy could assemble. Dr. Yun-Su stood at the central podium looking out at thousands of faces from dozens of species, all waiting to hear her analysis of what humanity represented to their carefully maintained galactic peace. The holographic displays around the amphitheater showed detailed scans of human ships and facilities that intelligence operatives had gathered. Over the past months, each image more troubling than the last. The human approach to engineering was unlike anything in the historical records, combining brutal efficiency with a level of redundancy that suggested they expected their equipment to operate under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Yun-Su began her presentation by explaining that human weapon systems were not simply more powerful versions of existing technology, but represented completely different philosophical approaches to warfare. Where most galactic civilizations had developed weapons as extensions of their existing scientific knowledge, humans appeared to have developed their entire technological base around the fundamental problem of how to destroy things more effectively. Tato. Audience listened in growing horror as she described human projectile weapons that could punch through armor plating, that would stop conventional energy beams, explosive devices that could crack the crust of a planet, and defensive systems that could function even after sustaining damage that would cripple any other military technology. The humans had not just built better weapons, but had reimagined what weapons could be. Professor Hai Wan took the podium next to present the cultural analysis that had been conducted using intercepted human communications and historical data. What she revealed painted a picture of a species that had never known true peace in their entire recorded existence, developing through constant conflict that had shaped every aspect of their civilization. The holographic displays showed human, historical timelines that made the assembled delegates question whether humanity could truly be considered a sapient species or if they were some kind of engineered weapon system that had achieved consciousness. Wars that lasted for decades, conflicts that consumed entire continents, and technological developments that were driven primarily by the need to kill other humans more efficiently. Hai Wan explained that human language contained hundreds of words. For different types of warfare, their literature was filled with stories glorifying conflict, and their entertainment consisted largely of simulated violence. Even their children played games that involved mock combat and strategic thinking, preparing them from an early age for the realities of a universe where violence was always an option. The cultural data revealed that humans had developed concepts like total war, mutually assured destruction, and scorched earth tactics that most galactic civilizations had never even conceived of as possibilities. They had built weapons capable of destroying their own planet multiple times over and had come close to using them on several occasions, only pulling back from the brink when the consequences became too terrible to contemplate. Commander Du Young of Galactic Intelligence presented the most disturbing findings of all when he took the podium to discuss human strategic thinking and military planning. The humans had not just built the Colossus-Class ships as weapons, but had designed them as mobile battle platforms, capable of projecting force across entire star systems. The technical specifications that intelligence had managed to gather suggested that a single Colossus-class vessel could generate enough firepower to sterilize the surface of a planet from orbit, maintain that bombardment for months without resupply, and defend itself against any conceivable counterattack. But the true genius of human engineering lay not in the raw power of their weapons, but in their ability to operate independently for extended periods. Du Young explained that the Colossus ships were not just warships, but self-contained military-industrial complexes capable of manufacturing their own ammunition, repairing battle damage, and even constructing smaller vessels to extend their operational reach. The humans had solved the fundamental problem that limited all military operations: logistics. The intelligence analysis concluded that when the Colossus-class ships became fully operational, a single vessel would possess enough combat capability to defeat the combined fleets of any 3 council races fighting together. 14 such ships would represent a military force capable of conquering the entire known galaxy if they chose to do so. The amphitheater erupted in chaos as the implications of the intelligence reports sank in among the assembled delegates. Representatives demanded immediate military action, while others called for diplomatic solutions, but everyone understood that they were facing a threat unlike anything in galactic history. Admiral Tae Ho took the podium to address the military. Implications of human capabilities, and his analysis was even more sobering than the intelligence reports. The humans had not just built superior weapons, but had developed tactical and strategic thinking that was generations ahead of conventional galactic military doctrine. Human ship designs incorporated damage control systems that allowed them to continue fighting even after sustaining hits that would destroy other vessels. Their weapons were designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer volume of fire, and their operational planning assumed that any conflict would escalate to maximum intensity as quickly as possible. The admiral explained that human military thinking was based on concepts that most galactic civilizations had abandoned as too destructive to contemplate. They planned for conflicts that would consume entire star systems, developed weapons that could crack planets, and trained their personnel to fight under conditions that would break the morale of any other species. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that the humans were not building their military capabilities in response to any external threat, but simply because they believed that being prepared for war was the natural state of any intelligent species. They saw conflict as inevitable and had structured their entire civilization around that assumption. As the emergency sessions continued through the night cycles, a consensus began to emerge among the delegates that humanity represented an existential threat to every other civilization in the galaxy. The humans had not made any hostile moves or issued any threats, but their very existence had upset the balance of power that had maintained galactic peace for thousands of years. The decision was made to assemble the largest military force in recorded history to contain the human expansion before their Colossus-class ships became operational. Representatives from 18 different species committed their fleets to what they called the pacification force, though everyone understood that they were really preparing for a war that might determine the future of galactic civilization. Yunsu filed her final report as the delegates departed to prepare their fleets, noting that humanity had achieved something that no other species in galactic history had managed. They had made the entire galaxy afraid of them without firing a single shot in anger. The humans had simply existed, built their ships, and prepared for conflicts that might never come. But their preparations were so thorough and so sophisticated that other civilizations had no choice but to assume the worst. The galaxy was about to learn that some species were fundamentally different from all others, and that humanity might represent a form of sapient life that other civilizations were simply not equipped to understand or contain. The age of peaceful coexistence was ending, and what would replace it depended entirely on what happened when the greatest military force in galactic history encountered the species that had made such a mobilization necessary. Fleet Admiral Dong Hyun stood on the bridge of the GSF Absolute Unity, watching the largest military armada in galactic history Assemble around his flagship in the empty space between star systems. Ships from 18 different species had answered. The Council's call to arms, creating a force that dwarfed anything that had ever been seen in recorded history. Dreadnoughts from the Crystalline Empire hung in formation beside the sleek destroyers of the Aquatic Collective, while the massive carrier groups of the Drakmori hegemony provided fighter cover for the entire fleet. The Pacification Force represented the combined military might of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. But as Dong-hyun reviewed the intelligence reports one final time, he wondered if it would be enough. The humans had completed construction of their first Colossus-Class vessel, and intelligence suggested that several more were nearing completion at shipyards throughout human space. Sensor operator Yuri called out contact reports as the fleet approached the edge of human territory, her voice steady despite the tension that filled the bridge. The humans had established patrol routes and sensor networks that detected the incoming fleet long before visual contact was made, but they had made no moves to intercept or challenge the massive armada bearing down on their space. The lack of immediate response from the humans was more unsettling than if they had scrambled every ship they possessed to meet the threat. Either they were completely unprepared for military action, or they were so confident in their capabilities that they saw no need to panic in the face of overwhelming opposition. Navigation Officer Taemin announced their arrival at the coordinates, where intelligence reported the first Colossus-class ship was conducting operational trials, and every being on the bridge leaned forward to see what appeared on the main view screen. The sight that greeted them defied every assumption they had made about human capabilities and sent chills through veterans who had thought they had seen everything the galaxy could offer. The UES Leviathan hung in space like a mechanical planet, its hull bristling with weapon systems that could level cities and defensive arrays that could deflect the firepower of entire fleets. The ship was so massive that the largest vessels in the Pacification Force looked like escort fighters beside it, and its energy signature suggested power generation capabilities that rivaled small stars. But it was not just the size of the human vessel that made experienced military officers question their sanity. It was the design philosophy that it represented. Every surface served a purpose, every weapon mount was positioned for maximum effectiveness, and every defensive system was integrated into a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. The humans had not just built a bigger ship, but had created something that redefined what a warship could be. Captain Wu Jin of the UES Leviathan opened communications with a casual friendliness that seemed completely at odds with the situation, greeting the massive fleet as if they were unexpected guests rather than a military force capable of sterilizing planets. His voice carried the kind of calm confidence that came from absolute certainty in one's own capabilities. The human captain explained that they were conducting live fire exercises with their new weapons systems and apologized for any inconvenience that the fleet's arrival might have caused. His tone suggested that he viewed the largest military force in galactic history as a minor annoyance rather than a potential threat to human civilization. Admiral Dong-hyun stepped forward to deliver the ultimatum that the Council had prepared, demanding that the humans stand down their military buildup and submit to inspection by galactic authorities. The words sounded hollow even as he spoke them, given the obvious disparity between the diplomatic language and the reality of what was happening in space around them. Wu Jin interrupted the Admiral with polite but firm dismissal, explaining that humans had a saying about never bringing inadequate weapons to a serious fight. His implication that the greatest military force in galactic history was inadequately armed for the situation sent waves of shock through the command crews of every ship in the fleet. The Leviathan's weapon systems powered up with energy readings that made sensor operators double-check their instruments. But the true horror began when additional contacts appeared on long-range sensors. 12 more Colossus-class vessels emerged from behind nearby asteroids, where they had been waiting in perfect concealment, their hulls gleaming with the look of ships fresh from the construction yards. The sight of 13 Colossus-class ships, arranged in battle formation, was enough to break the nerve of some fleet commanders, But the situation became completely hopeless when Captain Wu Jin corrected the count. A 14th massive vessel appeared on sensors as the UES Titan completed what he casually described as a routine shakedown cruise. Fleet Admiral Dong Hyun found himself in command of the largest military force ever assembled, facing 14 ships that collectively outgunned his entire armada by factors that his tactical computers could not calculate. The humans had not just matched the galactic response to their expansion, but had exceeded it so thoroughly that resistance seemed pointless. The communications channels filled with panicked chatter as fleet commanders realized the impossibility of their situation. But the humans made no threatening moves despite their overwhelming advantage. The Colossus ships maintained their positions and kept their weapons powered, but did not lock onto targets or issue ultimatums of their own. Captain Wu Jin continued the conversation as if nothing significant had happened, offering to discuss any concerns that the galactic fleet might have about human activities. His tone remained friendly and accommodating, even though he commanded enough firepower to reduce the pacification force to expanding clouds of plasma in a matter of minutes. The standoff continued for hours as fleet commanders waited for orders that never came, and human captains maintained their relaxed vigilance without showing any signs of aggression. The situation had moved beyond military confrontation into something that none of the galactic powers had planned for or could understand. Dong Hyun realized that the pacification force had been sent to contain a species that was already far beyond the point where containment was possible. The humans had not just built superior weapons, but had demonstrated strategic thinking that was generations ahead of anything the galaxy could counter. They had allowed the largest military force in history to approach their territory, revealed their true capabilities when it was too late for their enemies to retreat, and done it all while maintaining the pretense of peaceful intentions. The withdrawal order, when it finally came, was almost a relief to crews who had been staring at weapons that could crack planets for the better part of a day. The pacification force began its long journey back to Council space in complete silence. Every being aboard understanding that they had just witnessed the end of one era and the beginning of another. The humans watched them go with the same casual friendliness they had shown throughout the encounter, offering safe passage through human space and inviting the fleet to return any time for diplomatic discussions. Captain Wu Jin's final transmission included directions to the nearest human trading posts where the fleet could resupply if needed, treating former enemies as potential customers with the kind of practicality that was becoming recognizable as fundamentally human. As the GSF Absolute Unity jumped to hyperspace with the rest of the demoralized fleet, Admiral Dong Hyun understood that the galaxy had just learned a lesson about the dangers of assuming that all species thought alike. The humans had not conquered anyone or destroyed anything, but they had demonstrated that they possessed the capability to end galactic civilization whenever they chose to do so. The pacification force returned home with the knowledge that peace in the galaxy now depended entirely on human goodwill, and that goodwill was something that other species would have to earn rather than demand. The age of galactic dominance by established powers was over, and what would replace it would be determined by a species that built weapons like other civilizations, built monuments, and treated warfare as a form of engineering problem to be solved with typical human efficiency. The Galactic Council chambers had been completely redesigned to accommodate humanity's newest and most influential member, though the changes went far beyond simple architectural modifications. Ambassador Ji-hoon sat at the curved table that now formed the center of the chamber, his presence carrying the implicit weight of 14 Colossus-Class ships and the growing industrial might of human civilization spread across dozens of star systems. 6 months had passed since what historians were already calling the Leviathan Incident, and the galaxy had learned to adjust to new realities with the kind of resigned acceptance that came from having no other viable options. The human fleet remained stationed throughout the Outer Rim territories, conducting what they politely described as training exercises and humanitarian missions. though everyone understood the real purpose of their deployment. Ambassador Ji-hoon addressed the assembled delegates with the warm sincerity that had become the hallmark of human diplomacy, explaining that humanity came in peace and had always believed that the best way to ensure peace was to be prepared for war. The irony of the statement was not lost on anyone present, given that human preparations for war had fundamentally altered the balance of power in galactic civilization. The transformation of galactic politics had been swift and comprehensive, in ways that no one had anticipated when the Council first decided to send the pacification force to contain human expansion. Instead of forcing humanity back to their home system, the failed military intervention had demonstrated that humans were too powerful to be contained and too practical to be ignored. Admiral Sung-min took the podium to outline humanity's proposal for what they called the Galactic Defense Initiative, a comprehensive security arrangement that would provide protection for all member species under a unified command structure. The proposal was efficient, well-planned, and completely dominated by human doctrine, human ships, and human officers in all key positions. The beauty of the system, as Admiral Sung-min explained with the kind of enthusiasm that made other species nervous, was that every civilization would maintain their complete sovereignty while benefiting from protection against external threats. The fact that this protection happened to come from ships capable of glassing planets was described as a happy coincidence, rather than a deliberate feature of the arrangement. Counselor In-young raised a trembling appendage to ask what would happen if a species wished to opt out of the protection system, and the chamber fell silent as every delegate waited for the human response. Ambassador Ji-hoon's smile was warm and entirely terrifying as he asked why anyone would want to refuse protection in a galaxy full of dangers like pirates, rogue artificial intelligences, and dimensional incursions. The list of potential threats that humans could protect against seemed to grow longer with each diplomatic session, expanding to include hazards that most species had never considered as realistic possibilities. Human surveys had identified unstable stellar phenomena, ancient automated weapon systems, and hostile entities from parallel dimensions that posed existential risks to unprepared civilizations. The fact that humans were the only species with the military capability to deal with such threats made their protection services not just valuable, but absolutely essential for galactic survival. Other civilizations found themselves dependent on human goodwill for their continued existence, though the humans were always careful to frame the relationship as mutual cooperation rather than protection money. Captain Subin of the UES Colossus provided regular updates on fleet deployments and security operations from her position as coordinator of Outer Rim patrols. Her reports always included detailed accounts of pirates eliminated, rogue AI systems neutralized, and dimensional breaches sealed, though skeptical observers noted that most of these threats had only been discovered after human ships arrived in their respective areas. The human approach to galactic security was thorough, professional, and completely unchallengeable by any conventional military force. Their ships patrolled trade routes with the kind of efficiency that made piracy virtually impossible. Their bases provided safe havens for civilian vessels in distress, and their personnel were unfailingly polite and helpful to representatives of all species. But beneath the friendly professionalism lay the uncomfortable reality that human forces were present in every major star system, monitoring all communications and maintaining detailed intelligence files on every significant political and military leader in galactic civilization. The humans called it security coordination, though other species recognized it as the most comprehensive surveillance network in recorded history. The transformation of galactic economics had been equally dramatic as human industrial capabilities reshaped trade patterns and manufacturing processes throughout known space. Human factories could produce goods at prices that undercut traditional suppliers while maintaining quality standards that exceeded anything available from established sources. The competitive advantage came not from superior technology alone, but from human approaches to efficiency and logistics that other species found difficult to match. Humans planned their operations with the same attention to detail they applied to military campaigns, treating commercial competition as another form of warfare that required total commitment to achieve victory. Dr. Na Yun of the Xenohistorical Institute filed her preliminary analysis of the human transformation of galactic civilization, noting that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in recorded history. They had conquered the galaxy without firing a shot in anger, imposed their will without making demands, and established themselves as the dominant power while maintaining the fiction that they were simply helpful neighbors. The genius of human strategy lay in giving other species exactly what they asked for, while ensuring that what they received made them completely dependent on human support. The galaxy had peace, security, and prosperity, but it achieved these things only through systems that humans controlled and could withdraw at any time. Most remarkable was how grateful other species had become for human protection, despite understanding that the threats they were being protected from might not have existed without human intervention. The humans had made themselves indispensable by solving problems that they had often created themselves, though they did it with such skill that their victims thanked them for the service. The council sessions continued with discussions of trade, agreements, territorial boundaries, and cultural exchange programs. But everyone present understood that these were merely the formal mechanisms through which human authority was exercised. The real decisions were made in human command centers by human officers who politely consulted their galactic partners before implementing policies that served human interests. Ambassador Ji-hoon concluded the session by announcing that humanity was prepared to expand their protection services to include newly discovered civilizations in the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim. The offer was presented as a generous gesture of interspecies cooperation, though the assembled delegates recognized it as notice that human expansion would continue regardless of galactic opinion. As the delegates filed out of the chamber in contemplative silence, each carried the same uncomfortable knowledge that their civilizations had been conquered by the most polite and efficient predators the galaxy had ever produced. The humans had never threatened anyone directly, never demanded tribute or territory, and never broken their word about anything they had promised. But they had also made it clear that galactic civilization now existed at their sufferance, and that the price of continued existence was accepting human authority in all matters that humans deemed important. The galaxy had gained protectors who would ensure that peace reigned eternal, but it had also gained masters who were too polite to call themselves rulers and too practical to allow anyone to challenge their authority. Dr. Na Yun's final report concluded that humanity had redefined the concept of conquest for an age where direct military action was less effective than demonstrating overwhelming capability and then offering to use that capability for the benefit of others. The humans had taught the galaxy that the most effective form of dominance was the kind where the dominated thanked their masters for the privilege of serving them. The galaxy would never recover from its first look at the human Colossus-Class ship, because that single glimpse had revealed a species that thought about power, conflict, and civilization in ways that other forms of sapient life were not equipped to understand or resist. Humanity had won the ultimate victory by convincing everyone that they had actually won something valuable in return.